how to read the property market. It swings from a buyer's market, seller's market, but how can you identify it and pick the trends? Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Morning Minutes. Myself, Michael Bergio, Mark Novak, episode 326. Buyer's market, seller's market. What does it all mean? How to identify it and how to capitalize on it? Good morning, Mark.
Happy Monday, Mr. Bergio. Happy Monday, everyone.
Yes, beginning of a new week. We're in December. Let's get it going.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be
a little bit, everyone. Let's breathe.
Yeah, it's going to be. I think it's going to be a very different December to normally with property. We've always sort of worked through it, but I just feel like there's going to be a lot more activity. A lot more people are going to stay local. Because I'm hearing from a lot of people, just the cost of going to Byron Bay, Tasmania, is almost the same cost as if you went to Europe. So I think a lot of people are just going to stay home, and obviously Northern Beach is a bit of a destination for people. Like, obviously people who live in Northern Beaches will want to get out of Northern Beaches, but obviously a lot of will stay. But also a lot of people from other parts of Sydney, I feel, will travel to the Northern Beaches to spend the weekend, spend the holidays. So I think it's going to be a busy December.
Well, certainly the restaurants are busy, aren't they? If you're trying to go out to grab a bite on on any night, Wednesday night, Tuesday night, it's backed up. So it's going to be interesting to see how we go over this period.
Yeah, and it's good to see the restaurant picking up. They've had it tough out of all industries.
Definitely. And Jeff Luby, g'day, buddy. Lesio, he's back. All right, let's talk real estate, Michael. Let's talk real estate. Let's give people the good oil.
Yeah, so we always hear the terms. It's a seller's market. It's a buyer's market. So let's talk about what is a seller's market and what's a buyer's market. We'll start with like a seller's market, and there's obviously some key factors, and then within it are some trends. So like there's probably 4 key factors with the seller's market, which would be like your economic factors, your interest rates, stock levels, and they're your real key, which will determine which way the market trends compared to a buyer's market. Mark, talk us through a seller's market, what you see, what vendors do, buyers do, and what the market does.
Yeah, so look, if you're selling a house or selling a unit or selling land, when it's known as a seller's market, it's known as a good time. It's known as a positive time to be doing that, and it's known as it's a harder time for a purchaser to get it to actually secure something. The ball is in the seller's court, basically, and then there's lots of factors that create that. Very obvious ones, some not so obvious that we'll talk about. What are the ones that you reckon are obvious ones, Michael?
Lower interest
seller's market.
Create the seller's market. Low interest rates, so easier for buyers to get money and get more of it is a big one. We saw a couple of years ago where they made lending harder. People who were getting loans for $1 million are only getting loans for $700,000. People who may only get loans for $700,000 weren't getting. So just like anything, if there's more buyers cashed up ready to buy, then it puts that pressure on, putting an upward pressure on the on prices, because a lot of people have that mentality. Well, if the bank will give me an extra $100,000, it really means only an extra $20 a week on my mortgage. I'm quite happy to spend that extra $100,000 if I really want that property. So that's a really big one. Talk about that's a factor. What about stock levels, Mark? What do you see how stock levels relate to a seller's market?
There's tighter stock, so people are more reluctant to sell. And people are much more G'd up to buy. And you know what an interesting measure is, very hard measure, is consumer sentiment in the marketplace. Consumer sentiment will always lead to really good positive activity if it's good positive sentiment. And at the moment, you and I were saying that COVID's created something a little bit of a cocoon, and a little bit of a cushion for people, where I think people have been more affectionate towards their home, towards property, more so than a stock market or a commercial property, because I think we've all been touched up a little bit. Like, I think we're all sensitive a little bit about what matters to us. And I think property, your roof above your head, has something that's actually benefited. And now you're seeing that leverage in the marketplace, because people are like, you know what, I'm going to get that house with an extra bedroom. You know what, with that extension on the house, you know what, I'm going to buy that couch that I've always wanted, because they're more affectionate towards their homes and they're dwelling at home more.
Exactly. And I just want to point out, what does the seller's market mean for a buyer? And just because you hear the term, and key things I see how it affects buyers is a higher purchasing price, a shorter purchasing timeline from when the property goes to market and when it's sold. In a really hot market, you're seeing it sold in a day, in a week, in 2 weeks. Also,
so would you not buy if you're a buyer? Would you hold off buying in a seller's market, or would you buy quicker?
No, it'd just be, you got to identify what you have to adapt to. So the longer time frame, also the terms favor the seller more often. And what I mean by that, cooling off period being shorter, if any, and the time to exchange the property. So they're probably your core three. And it's not saying don't buy in those times. It's just be aware, because we often see buyers who are going under the model of a buyer's market in a seller's market, and they continually miss out on properties because they're not adapting or they're acting too slow. So they're probably the key things buyers need to register when they hear a seller's market, that they may need to be a bit sharper on.
Do we see a seller's market for longer periods than we see a buyer's market? So if property values, for argument's sake, are doubling every 10 years, would that then mean that we're seeing more so sellers markets, and then over longer periods and over shorter periods buyer markets?
Well, I think if we look at least the last sort of decade, it was very stable for 7 years and a big 3 years. So that would indicate 7 years of a buyer market and then 3 sharp years of a seller's market. So it just goes with it. Like, the end of the day, you're playing the long game. I think the difference in identifying is obviously the process may change. So that's a seller's market. Let's go to a buyer's market. And the key factors for a buyer's market, interest rates may be trending higher, short drop in interest rates. So that's more the interest rates drop and then people anticipate them going back up. High inventory, it could be a lot of developments and new stock, so there's less pressure on interest rates. But also it says a natural disaster. So I feel, looking at these factors, we've got a combination of both going on at the moment, where we've got the natural disaster.
Because you did research for the first time in 300 episodes this morning.
Yeah, just found a topic and there were some bullet points, so some light reading. So, and I was sort of looking at both of them going, well, we sort of tick many boxes in both markets. But I sort of go back to my core belief for right now in this market and for the next 2 years, where our economy needs stimulation, especially while we don't have tourism, education, and immigration. So the best way for our economy to get it, and the quickest, is through construction. And as this says, if you're going to have big construction markets, you need a surging property market to stimulate that. So I know we tick the boxes of the natural disaster and then low interest rates, which people may anticipate going back up, but we then still have low inventory in the seller's market and very low interest rates, and we need the stimulation to the economy. So Mark, how do things change in a buyer's market for buyers and sellers?
Well, I actually find it interesting that we've taken away immigration and we've taken away tourism, and our property market still does well.
Yeah.
Stuff still gets rented, and property prices are on the way up. I find that really, because if you told me that 6 months ago or 9 months ago, I probably would have shit myself thinking, oh my God, there go our foreigners buying and immigrating to the country permanently, and there goes tourism, which is people renting stuff and spending locally. So I'm amazed that our economy has been so buoyant. I do have to say, I think Australians and the politicians and the government have grossly underestimated how much money an average Australian takes offshore. And I've said it in the show, a couple of shows before. If you were, it was very expensive to travel in Australia traditionally, previously. And what we used to do is go offshore because it was expensive to go north or to go south, and even to hire a caravan was expensive, insurances, fuels, and stuff like that. So people go to Bali and spending $5, $4-5 on airfares with 2 kids. People go to Bali and doing a bit of shopping and accommodation, another $4-5 grand. That $10,000 that a family would spend going to Bali in the course of a year is now being spent locally and in people's coffers. Very interesting. Back to your question. What was the question? What are we seeing in a buyer's market?
How do buyers act, how is it different in a buyer's market for the buyers and for the sellers? So maybe some longer buyer times, longer days on market. So what are the differences? Hey, Anmel.
Everything's just a bit more relaxed. So in a buyer's market, the buyer often the prices are falling. So what you make an offer, sometimes you end up buying it for even less if a couple of weeks later. Sometimes in a buyer's market, you can name your terms much harder. You can ask for long settlements. You can ask for a lower price. You can ask for the vendor to wait for you until you sell your property. It's just that there's a lot more steam out of the market. And I think that properties on the market, days on market at the moment, sitting about 15 to 20 days for an average property. And I think days on market goes up to about 90 days on average in a buyer's market.
Yeah, and I think there's a big fact. I think I want to identify just in a seller's market and a buyer's market, a lot of the time, it's not necessarily. It's prices have dropped too much or they've increased too much. I think it's a lot of it, the speed and the terms vary. And then you've got the occasional property that goes for a crazy price. So for example, because an agent's always guiding properties within 10% for when you appraise it. Then, and to give an example, a property's worth $800,000. Even in a buyer's market and a seller's market, it still may sell for $800,000. The difference is in the seller's market, it may sell within 3 days. It's got to be an unconditional sale. It's very, very quick, and you've just the timing. And in a buyer's market, it may still sell for $800,000, but it sells in 30 days. You have a 10-day cooling off period. The buyer can pick the settlement. Obviously, there's exceptions where it may sell for $780, and there's exceptions that may sell for $820. So it's not to be discouraged for a buyer or a seller if you're doing deals in either transaction. They just vary. And I think it's a lot more, they vary in the terms that go around it. But obviously in a seller's market, you more often see that auction for that rare property go for $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 above the expected price. You may see that with 30% of auctions, where in a buyer's market, you may only see that with 10%. So it's just knowing, adapting, and seeing.
So a buyer's market, prices are going down or level. In a seller's market, prices are going up, and it's a lot snappier in general in the seller's market. And today we are in.
I would say we're definitely we're in a seller's market. We're heading that direction, especially with momentum the last 2 months. Definitely around March and May, June, probably a bit more of a buyer's market. But it's quick. So we went from a buyer's market to a seller's market pretty quickly. And there's a lot of forecasts for next year that 5, 10, 15, I think as high as I've seen 12% growth scheduled for next year. So very, very different.
I reckon it swung from a buyer's market to a seller's market in about 12 weeks.
Yep. Happens quick. And then you compare.
And that's a show.
That's a show. But then you compare it to a commercial market, which is still very much in a buyer's market, a stalled market. So there's your difference. The essential, what you said before about being essential. Residential is essential.
It's essential. And guys, just remember with our show, if you have any real estate questions or anything you'd like us to talk about, put it in the comments below, and we'll cover that topic in the days, weeks ahead. And a lot of our content's coming from users asking us to talk about certain stuff. So thank you very much to everyone.
Cool. Thanks, legends. Cheers.
Have a great Monday.